Scott County, providing safe, healthy, and livable communities.
Okay, who do we have to kick this off? Chris, is that you?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. This morning we are joined by leaders, some from the county, CDA, also from some of our cities, to talk about economic development. And I'm not sure who the author was of the very first sentence in this packet, but I think it's important because it says that economic development can be defined as the government's planned focus to make improvements in the standard of living through job creation, infrastructure, and supporting innovation. And that's really what we're here to talk about today. I think some interesting things around our investments and the impact of those investments is where we're going to start. You're going to hear a little bit about some contrast in data points about Scott County's recovery from the pandemic as opposed to some of our neighboring communities and counties. And so it's a broad topic that we're going to try to cover in an hour, but I think we have the right people in the room to have the conversation. So with that, I'll ask the folks on this side of the table to introduce yourselves. And then Lisa, if you could start just who you are and what role you play, and then we'll jump right into questions.
I'm Paula Gustafson. I'm a business relationship manager here in Scott County.
Jake Greasing, I'm the license director here.
Greg Sorensen, Chief Information Officer.
Sarah Mulcrum, Fiber Manager.
Carrie Ouimet, Economic Assistance Director.
Barb Dahl, Health and Human Services Director.
Michael Kursky, Director of Planning and Development for the City of Shakopee.
Jill Faust, Business and Community Development Director for the Scott County CDA.
Brad Davis, Planning and Resource Management Director.
Lisa Fries, Scott County Transportation Services Director.
And then remotely, we have Mr. Ondish.
Yeah, Ken Ondish, Community Development Director, City of New Prague.
From the City of New Prague. Thank you very much for being with us this morning. All right, I think we're going to start with transportation and fiber and then move into jobs and workforce. Paula, you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start out this morning. Good morning. When we think about transportation, I was looking at many of your slides, especially slides on page 30 and I think page 29, where we see some benefits to values, we see benefits to reliability. And I was wondering, how does this success with the transportation initiatives, the success of ATMS that's mentioned on the front page, the success of the value increase of properties around this, inform your future decisions as you're making decisions about what you're going to tackle going forward?
Well, typically from a county transportation perspective, we look to our 20-year plan and we do a lot of work about where we plan investments and we model to see the impacts of those plans investments to see if we have potential congestion issues. And I think one of the maps that are on one of the slides here do show that, and it shows that we've been planful, and in the areas where we can influence, we've made investments in the right places. I think the regional system is very key because that provides us connection to the interstate system and the rest of the metro area. And without that mobility on those systems, then places throughout the county become more removed and it's harder to get to. And so those investments, I think, have helped shape the development in the county and make areas that are further out, like the Belle Plaines, the Jordans, the Elko New Markets, more attractive for investment in economic development.
As a follow-up question, as far as the infrastructure from the cities and the transportation plans, how do these infrastructure plans support economic development?
You know, I think from a county perspective, as Lisa said, we're really planful. We look at where growth is projected to occur, and particularly look at the city's long-range plans, and then look at what investments do we need to make at a county level to support that growth. And then at times work with the cities on some of their long-range plans or kind of area-wide plans. And I know in the city of Shakopee, they did a pretty expansive study of the West End to look at what infrastructure is needed. And maybe we could, I'll turn it over to Michael just to talk a little bit about that study and then how infrastructure investments were made from that type of study.
Sure, we did a AUAR for the entire West End because there was some issues on sewer capacity and water capacity, and because of that, Shakopee Public Utilities built a new water tower out there, and they're in the process right now of completing a new substation. So we look at not only road infrastructure, but utility infrastructure and power. I think those investments have paid off. We're seeing, we brought a new lift station in for sewer and water out there, and there's a new industrial project under construction right now.
I have a question on the page 17 for the digital divide. It kind of looks like it's doing really well compared to its counterparts. You know, 7.23 leading the representative counties. And so as we try to approach zero, what level of investment, you know, the last mile, so to speak, is always the most expensive mile to get to. So how do you really drive that? And what's the investment point where we say we've kind of invested enough to bring it, do we need to bring it down any further because that last piece is so costly?
So the digital divide, we have had a really good trend, and I think that our role where we try to encourage providers to continue to make investments on the last mile to residents and to businesses will help continue to improve the infrastructure component of the socioeconomic and infrastructure calculation that drives the digital divide, the digital index. Some of them, like the socioeconomic component of the digital index, is sort of, it is what it is. It's the geography of the area. But I think that investments in education continue to help because the demographics can then access and utilize the infrastructure that's been put in place by the providers.
Okay. So of the 7.23, do we have an idea of what percent is affordability, what is, you know, actual having access at all? I mean, where is the investment? Is it an affordability issue or an access issue?
I think more of the providers are actually making investments right now actively on access. They do. Every one of the providers has a affordability program for people who are there on free and reduced launches or those kinds of programs. They can then access, like I know Comcast has one of those programs. Every one of the major providers has some sort of affordability program. I was telling Kursky that we are meeting with his staff today. The Shakopee, there's a couple providers who are actively making additional investments in Shakopee, which is already built out, but they want to continue making investments for access.
Perry, can I do 2 follow-up questions on that? As we were planning for this, you were busy with our legislative colleagues, and so there are 2 questions that came out of that. And one is just anecdotally, what do we know about school kid access? You know, there's this very compelling commercial on TV about kids that do and don't have access. And so just anecdotally, what do you know about kids in Scott County and their access? So let me pause there and then I'll ask my second question.
Okay, so I think we have some data points on, is it page 2? Where we talk a little bit about students in general. So page 2 has where a University of Miami study found that a 1 point increase in high school GPA raises the earnings by about 12%. So if 2 students are both, let's say, identical, their parents are identically involved in raising, they have the same classes, but one has access to adequate broadband, the other one does not. The student who has lower access or lower broadband will be almost a full half a point lower on GPA, which affects colleges, affects earnings, and all those kinds of things. So to answer your question about at Scott County, the board made some significant investments in 2020, which was able to have us partner with a provider to provide fixed wireless access to the rural parts of Scott County, and that was very successful. That is also driven, as I pointed out, some additional investments by providers in the rural parts of Scott County as well with wireless. So we're in a pretty good spot. We want to continue to see every time. Broadband is one of those things where the more you use it, the more they consume it, right? So it's the 2026 state goal is to be at 100 by 100, 100 download by 100 upload. The 2022 goal was 25 download and 3 meg upload. We've achieved that for 95% plus of Scott County, so that's helped our students. And then anecdotally, our IT directors for the schools have indicated that more and more of their students have access and are not requiring as many of the hotspots.
My second question was, as we were planning for this conversation, we talked a lot about partnership between with fiber and highway development and laying fiber along new highway projects and those kinds of things. And I'm wondering what people, anyone in this group, thinks about our efforts to market that as an asset in Scott County that would bring employers here.
So we've been working really great with the Transportation Services Division on being really in alignment when they're doing a project and us, the fiber planning being at the same time, and where we put in fiber or conduit when it makes sense, not every single time, because you don't want to have conduit out just in the middle of nowhere if they're putting in or replacing a section of road. It just becomes expensive. But I think that we are in a very good spot with what we did with the advanced traffic management system and connecting the signals and those kinds of things. And we are in a unique spot to tell a great story to potential employers about our infrastructure. We've had in the past, when some of the companies have come here, we were able to tell them that we have national providers as well as regional providers that ride our fiber and can get pretty much to any of the major economic development lots. So I think we just want to continue to get out and tell that story. With that, I'll open it up to you guys on the panel.
I think we've worked pretty well hand in hand with Perry on that. We've had some questions over time about when's the right time to put the infrastructure in, whether it's good to put conduit in, and with a project, if we don't know if it's going to be filled or not. I think that verdict is still out. We did that on County Road 42, and I think we're hoping that will reap some benefits for that corridor because it's more intensely developed. So I think as long as we continue to work together collaboratively and try to make the best economic decisions as we're making those investments, based on what we know, I think we can help advance fiber network countywide.
So, you look like you were also going to say something, Joe.
Yes, we often receive leads from either the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development or Greater MSP, and many times they'll ask about fiber availability, and we collaborate with Perry, and he's been very responsive in providing us with the maps and the information that we need in order to make those responses to the larger companies or leads.
Thanks. I'm sorry, Greg, go ahead.
So do we have an idea the county makes a lot of investment in fiber. Do we have any idea what our percentage investment is for the fiber you use out there versus the providers? I mean, are we providing 25% investment, 50? What's the kind of investment split portfolio between what the providers invest and what the county invests?
I don't know that answer offhand, but I can get it and try to get that back to everybody through an email. But I guess my instinct is that the providers have made such significantly more investment. As you know, the last mile is expensive. We do have a program where we have open access, where we work with providers to try to get them on through the middle mile to the last mile, so that they can get to new markets, or they can get to, in this example, the economic development or those commercial and industrial lots. We actually have a couple providers that we are actively working with to get them over that middle mile, to use our fiber, which would cost them a lot of money to try to build that. So if they can leverage our middle mile to get to the final mile, but that final mile still is a significant investment. And the providers do apply to the Office of Broadband, their border-to-border grant, and that is typically a 50-50 split. So of the government, either like a local municipality matching it or the provider helping cover the half that match and then filling that out over time. And then the state makes the half that investment.
So when I think of the digital divide, I think of kind of three legs to that stool. There's the broad, just the infrastructure, which this board has made investments in, and you've turned that investment into success at a higher level in terms of economic development. But there's also access to the technology and the hardware to make use of that connectivity resource, and there's the ability to know how to use that technology and the hardware. So I'm wondering, from like Barb and Carrie's perspective, in terms of economic development, are there gaps, or are there things you're doing to help people participate in the labor force to upskill that builds off that infrastructure? Now that we have almost everybody in the county having that access, those other two legs of that stool with the resources and the training and skills to use those resources, what are we doing in that space right now?
That's a great question. We aren't offering anything specifically here internally. That's like, workshops that are run by our staff, but there are a number of workshops that are offered through the Career Force system by the state of Minnesota. And then, of course, if there's any kind of, depending on the individual's kind of career goals and what their current skill set is, and if they've been laid off and they need some upskilling, like you were saying, if they're enrolled in one of our programs, they do have access to some pretty significant training funds. So depending on what their career goal is and what their skill goal is, they will work one-on-one with an employment counselor to kind of find some of that more specialized training available, and hopefully we'll get into that program and we can help fund that.
Mm-hmm. Could we look at the charts on pages, well, it goes 12, 13, and 14 really looks at labor force and labor force projections. And I wonder if one of you could talk about the pieces of that stand out most importantly as you think about planning and investments going forward.
Yeah, I think if you look on 12, it probably just helps to demonstrate the story that we continue to keep hearing about our labor shortages. I think this indicates that we had roughly about 2,000 workers that were entering the workforce here locally each year, and now that has come down about 1,000 workers. So that just impacts our ability to, from the economic development side, you have to have the workforce in order to expand your growth. On the plus side of that, we are continuing to see growth within our workforce, and I think there are some counties and even statewide that they haven't been as lucky to be able to see that and demonstrate that. And I think even if you look statewide at our population, Tim O'Neill from DEED had shared some data just as of Friday, and I want to say that the state of Minnesota had decreased our population by like around 20,000 people over the last 2 years, and we've actually seen growth. We know that within our population, and then in addition to that, within our working age labor force, to see that increase is beneficial and helpful.
Could you point out more for the board about some of the pieces what are some of the nuggets that have made Scott County come through that pandemic recovery process a little stronger than some other communities? And that's really to anyone on the panel that wants to speak to that.
Yeah, I think probably one thing to highlight on the bottom of 13 talks a little bit just about the number of jobs that have come back since COVID had started. And we have seen an 11.7% increase in our jobs. And when you look at statewide, Minnesota's only seen a 0.5 increase. And so some of that stems to, I think, creating some of the conditions that we're talking about here today of supporting economic development. I think the diversity of our labor sectors that we have here have really been beneficial, but my colleagues probably have other thoughts.
Perhaps in addition to that too, in Scott County, we have a higher labor participation rate. So I think statewide it's around 69%, and we're in the mid-70s. So of those that are able to work in Scott County, a higher percent are in the labor force working.
And why is that? Do you know?
We have a highly skilled and educated population. I think whether they're employed in Scott County or elsewhere, that may be part of it. Also, the expanding job opportunities here, I think, assist with that.
Thank you.
As a follow-up to that, I was looking at page 13 and page 12, and we can see that we have had a decrease in the available workers, but we see a strong increase in employment trends. And so I wanted to, if you could talk a little bit about that and the impact of having a reduced labor force, but yet in a significant job growth. Are those jobs being filled by people outside of Scott County? If we're having those jobs available in Scott County, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we have continued to see the number of jobs available within Scott County has increased. So we have about 60,000 jobs right now within Scott County. We have a labor force of around 83,000. So that our labor force is the people that work here, or I'm sorry, that live here. They might not always work here. And I think that, again, we've been fortunate enough that we have continued to still see a net increase overall of the people that are entering into the labor force. So I think that's helpful. And I think that we have had a number of new opportunities that have been available within the county that have still allowed us to have that labor force participation rate remain high.
I think one of the things to also point out, if you look at slide 26, and we looked at the travel sheds before and after the 169 and 41 interchange project. Now, it's greatly influenced by some of the impacts of COVID, but if you look at the dark orange, that's where the concentrations of trip-ins were prior to COVID, and as you can see, we're seeing a lot more folks from the south of Scott County, coming to Scott County and then reverse commuting or going home at night. So we're seeing that at least our labor shed area has increased, particularly to the south. And so that's one of the noteworthy things I think that's going on in helping fill some of those jobs in Scott County.
One of the things that we have kind of kicked around is about on page 8. Page 8 really captures the county scale goal of 50 by 30. And so I'm wondering if someone can just highlight that, but also talk about how do we consider the work from home workforce as we think about this and as we think about planning going forward.
I can address that. So about a decade ago, there was a goal to establish 50% of the residents living and working within Scott County. Back in 2012, it was about 36%. In 2021, that number increased for the first time above 50% at 56.3% were living and working in Scott County. In speaking with the State Demographer's Office, they attribute a large percent of that increase to the increased 13,000 jobs that were added in Scott County. Another contributing factor is the increase in the number of individuals that post-COVID working from home. That's now at 24.4%. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that was helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, so to follow up on that, so if ours was 50%, and yet a lot of that was attributed to kind of remote working, what would it be, and what type of investment? I mean, have we arrived at the 50%? Are we trying to get the non-remote worker number to 50%? Kind of what's the goal here? Have we reached our goal, or are we still looking at our goal as actual working in the county, not teleworking?
I think the initial goal was to have 50% of our residents living and working in Scott County, so we would consider it having been met. But I think there's always room for improvements. It will reduce the transportation trips on the roads, have people more engaged in the community. If we could increase that, we're still below the 7-county metropolitan area. We're above a couple of the neighboring counties, but I think anytime we can have more residents living and working here is better for the county as a whole, especially with the high skill sets we have and some of the jobs that we have available, if they could fill those internally.
I agree with Joe. The origins of that goal really was to alleviate congestion on our major river crossings for commuters going up north to work. And so I think the fact that we do have more jobs here in the county and more people working from home achieves that kind of origin goal of getting less traffic off of those crossings. So I'd say it's a win, and I think it's a sustainable win. I can't imagine those numbers dropping anytime soon.
Does that change anything? I mean, for everybody sitting at the table, okay, we've hit the goal of 50% living and working here. Does that change how you think about your work at all?
For me, I've thought about it, and I think we have a much higher daytime population in our communities than we've ever had. And I think that's helped then drive some of the retail that serves that daytime population. I think we keep thinking of new amenities to serve that daytime population. With people working from home, they tend to have a little more flexibility and might be able to recreate or go golfing or do some activities throughout the day. So I think that we're going to see more of that type of amenity kind of development. But maybe Michael and Ken, you have a perspective on what's happening in your cities around that topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen with people being at home, there's a higher demand in our parks and trail system. So we made a major investment in increasing our quality of playgrounds and extending our trail system and making sure all the new subdivisions are all linked together. People want to be able to recreate in the middle of the day. You'll see a lot more people on the trails than you've ever seen.
Ken, are you seeing more daytime population in New Prague?
Can I ask another question about this slide?
You can.
Okay. Just checking.
No.
No.
So I was surprised when I was reading through the packet not to see, and maybe I missed it, but I didn't see the words greater MSP anywhere. And Joe, you mentioned greater MSP in a response just a little bit earlier. So when I look at this, I say on the one hand, yes, we met our goal. In 3 years, we went from 41% to 56%. But if I look at our neighboring counties, everybody, including Hennepin County, went up by a sizable margin. So we will think about what that means for us in terms of economic development locally. But are we plugged into any conversations with greater MSP on what are the implications of that shift regionally, and where does Scott County fit within that regional picture of how the workforce has really changed, where they're working, and then what does that mean for our local communities?
I think greater MSP is looking at target marketing types of industries that match skill sets of the greater MSP region. Transportation-wise, I know they came on a bus tour of Scott County and became familiar with our transportation system, our available lots, et cetera, so that they can help guide some of those leads to us that might be a fit for our communities. And they do support us leads that they receive that are looking in areas within a certain parameter of airports, the Twin Cities, et cetera. Specifically, I'm talking to them about the commuting statistics. We have not had that conversation, but probably should.
So I got a question kind of on that. On page 27 is our MVTA routes. And I realize we don't have the most current data, and obviously 2021 is probably due to COVID and people not working. But do we have any kind of anecdotal data where we're going with transit and trying to get the right worker to the right spot and them relying on transit? It looks like there's just a huge decrease is that decrease temporary due to COVID based on the data you have? Or is this going to become a transportation problem to get the right worker with the right skill to the right work?
Well, transit's been one of those areas, I think nationwide, that's seen the biggest impact from COVID. And the Twin Cities, and in particular Scott County, has seen some of those trends. The takeaways that I see in this is that if you look at our service area, our service hours, they've kind of rebounded and they're flat on page 30. I think that's page 30 or 28, sorry. But the passenger trips has really declined. And there's also, as a result of and in addition to the decline, there's been a shift. The shift has been away from the express routes to the downtown, the ones that would carry the workers to downtown Minneapolis or downtown St. Paul. What we have pegged as commuter route here is that the 495 route, which was started in 2017, 2018 as a demonstration from the Mall of America to Shakopee, that's been pretty steady. It's rebounded after COVID, kind of peaked in 2018, and it's still strong, but it's not back to pre-COVID levels. And then the other thing that has happened is that the providers in MBTA has put a focus on, since their express ridership, there's not a demand for it, they've shifted their service hours to local. But you can see that the local passengers have not really grown by the amount that probably the service hours have grown. So I think transit remains to be seen how well it rebounds, and in particular in Scott County, it's hard to put cost-effective transit on the ground. If you look at, this year we didn't include those slides, but if you look at transit subsidy per rider, Scott County's routes have some of the highest in the region. And so it's something that we need to be aware of as we go forward. Can we afford, or is it cost effective? There's one data point that I've seen that has shown that one thing that's kind of behind this is that things like Uber and Lyft have grown more, while public transit actually has either flat or declining, but Uber and Lyft have grown. And I think part of that is because they're more flexible and people can call that service on demand. And it's part of the reason I think that our local service providers like Southwest and MBTA are really looking to these on-demand type services to see if they can meet the demand better for the residents in the county.
So when we talk about the subsidy, we have a high subsidy, and you look at the Uber, Lyft, and where they're going and the flexibility there. Do we participate, or is there any subsidies for that? I mean, is that from transportation, get people at the right time, right location? Is there subsidies for that, or something we could be working towards? Would that be a more flexible to get people to these weird locations at odd times?
That is something that probably we need to do a little bit more investigation on. We did do some work a few years ago, and there wasn't enough Uber and Lyft providers in the area to really make it cost effective. But as we see that market grow, there's more drivers out there, and potentially there's more opportunity. I think the thing that transit really provides is that because it is subsidized, it provides a cost-effective ride for those folks who don't have economic means, where Uber and Lyft, that has a financial implication. If you can afford it, it's great. If you can't afford it, it's not a great option. So it's probably one of the things we do need to see if there's a way that we can help utilize that private marketplace to help provide more rides.
So Lisa, tie it back to Jake's question, because I think the hub and spoke model has lots of issues. And it goes back to Jake's question on the disbursement of jobs and how transit ties to that.
That is the $1 million issue, and I see we're going to be making large investments in transit, but we no longer have that downtown core to bring transit to. We've looked at things like the 169 Transitway as a means to, one, provide other opportunities along 169 and 55 for people to go to different places, and vice versa, to get people from the center city who have maybe job skills that are aligned with some of our jobs here in the county out here. But those systems are expensive to develop, and they also, if you develop like a transitway, you are setting up a level of investment that if things shift, then you can't shift those, the infrastructure around as easy. And that's part of the struggle with all of these light rail lines and BRT lines that are being developed. Once you make that investment, you've got a lot of dollars put into those systems, and hopefully the investment will come around them, but then other parts of the metro don't have service. I don't know if I hit on that adequately or not, Leslie.
Yeah, no, I think that's part of it. And I think it ties, though, when Jake asked what was the impact with the job shift. It is right there. And to Brad's point, even during the day, it changes the use within the system here within the community, correct? So there are impacts. And I think, Jake, it's probably still a couple of years out from maybe understanding what those totally are. But that job shift there has really changed how people move.
Hang on, Commissioner Ulrich, did you have a question?
Maybe Les or Lisa can respond to this, but I believe that we received federal guidance, MVT and other providers, to keep the system going, the routes running, the system going during the pandemic, and so that created more inefficiency and more higher subsidies because we were basically instructed to keep those routes going. Is that your understanding, Lisa?
His question was that during the pandemic, the federal FTA requested that we continue to keep these transit routes growing, which increased the subsidy.
And I think that's true metro-wide, but in particular, we've seen the express routes that MVTA had pretty much have been diminished. We're down to probably about a 10% of the service pre-COVID, which makes sense. People are consistently going downtown. We used to have a very strong service to the U. That's no longer operating at the level that it was before through MVTA. I think we have seen them really focus on trying to increase local routes. They started a route along 42 and to Prior Lake and to Mystic Lake, and so some of the service is still there, but where they're providing it is different. I think if you look to the core, you'll see a little bit different kinds of things happening there. Some of their stronger routes are these arterial, what they're calling the arterial BRTs, which historically have been their high-performing transit routes along certain corridors in Minneapolis and St. Paul and the first ring suburbs. And those routes are really doing quite well in comparison to others.
Brad, can we look at pages 22 and 23? And could you talk about how the work that your team does, like as requests or plans for annexations come forward, the narrative for this discussion talked about that sort of tension between growth and preservation of some of the natural spaces. And so as you get requests or projects, how does your team evaluate the economic development impact as you are weighing which projects to support and go forward on, and help us think through that annexation piece?
Yeah, so the page 22 shows the amount of land that's been annexed by each city over the last 23 years. And it shows both land that then ultimately develops as residential development, which is primarily what you see a lot of yellow on the graph. But there are significant annexations that occur to really then accommodate commercial and industrial development. And in particular, Shakopee has seen a lot of that here in the last couple of years. New Prague, we needed to update that table once Ken saw this because we did not include some of the annexations that occurred in LeSueur County. So, and then they've also recently annexed some property. And Ken, do you want to speak to that and then how that area is being staged for economic development on the north side of your community, Ken?
Yeah, so as Brad noted here, we've, over the past 23 years in New Prague, I've had a little under 300 acres of annexation on the Scott County side of the city, a little over 200 on the LeSueur County side. But recently, we developed our own city industrial park. Here in New Prague, we had annexed back in 2015 about 23 acres. We've sold all but 3 of those lots outright and have pending sales on the additional, or the remaining 3 acres or 6 acres or 3 lots that we had remaining. And we're looking potentially from the EDA standpoint to annex up to another 76 acres immediately north of our industrial park for more development. But that gets into a whole bigger discussion of, again, infrastructure utility-wise and then local roadway extensions into the industrial park area for our industrial park to continue to grow. But, you know, we're not on any major roadway or anything, so it's not to the level of like, you know, 169 or 35 improvements, but local improvements are really our hang up at this point.
So on page 23 shows several maps of where these annexations have occurred over the last 3 years. And the city of Shakopee and the city of Elk New Market has probably annexed the largest areas, and for mostly commercial and industrial development. I know the city took in some acreage for continued residential development. But with Michael here, maybe Michael, talk about just how important some of those annexations are to the future growth of Shakopee in your commercial and industrial area.
Sure. So all of the land on that map and along 169 is all slated for industrial or commercial development. The area that's in blue on the bottom of that map is going to be residential, and there's a small little piece in the red that'll be residential. But Opus has already got 500,000 square feet under construction, and we're seeing probably another a million to 1.5 million square feet in that area for industrial development. And we're specifically not allowing warehouse and distribution because we found that we, from a wage standpoint, can't keep pace with the rest of the Twin Cities. We're at the last project we just did for Sam's Club distribution. They're having to pay $24 an hour. I can remember, I think Amazon is at $15 an hour. So we're really trying to get the higher wage, higher value jobs now.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this, on page 20 shows some information that Maxfield Research did a couple of years ago, or last year, 2022, looking at industrial land supply and demand. And I think that data kind of reflects where we're going to continue to see some kind of annexation issues popping up between our cities and townships. Those areas that have a deficit of what we called class 1 and 2 acres. And class 1 meant it was essentially pad ready. The lot was platted, it had utilities to the lot, it was ready to develop with a building permit. Class 2 was properties that were zoned for the development, may be platted or not, but doesn't have utilities directly there. It's kind of within that last mile of extending utilities. And overall, across all of our cities, we have a shortage of that class 1 and 2 acreage. And I think as we continue to see demand for this type of development, cities are going to need to annex properties, greenfield sites, get them into the city boundaries, and then start the staging of sewer and water and streets. So that kind of demand that you see in page 20, to me, then relates to some of the annexation discussions and activities that we start hearing about at the county. And then often at the county level, we're brought in if there's any decisions about updating orderly annexation agreements to really accommodate this type of transfer of land, and just work through those issues has been our role.
Thank you. One last question.
I'll take one kind of in the preamble and transportation on page 2. They talk about the CAV, connected autonomous vehicles. When do we see it happening? What's the impact? We have such a large fleet of cars in the world that don't have that. Where do we see that in the future? What type of investment? Is that investment greater than other types of ATMS investment? How does that look going forward the next 10 to 20 years?
Well, we've been trying to monitor that, and I think with COVID, the initiative slowed down a little bit, but now we're starting to see more discussions. We've seen demonstrations of connected vehicles, particularly transit-type vehicles and autonomous vehicles, and they're still having struggles in winter climates to be fully functional. So I think there's a lot of work to be done yet in the technology area. While we've made investments in fiber and equipment, we don't know where that technology is going to land and what's going to be the state of the art. Is it going to be a record, a CD, a 8-track? Going forward, there's a lot of work to figure out what the state of that technology will be and how it works both in rural areas, which we still have a substantial amount of rural areas on our roadways, and then also in more urban areas. So I think we'll see a variety of things happen. Right now, the electrification of the fleet seems to be the current focus, trying to get us to move to that technology versus totally, gas-powered vehicles. So moving forward, I think it could happen rather rapidly, but I don't think we're on the immediate cusp of a great change in that area. Others may disagree, but.
The statement in there that, the fiber network and the ATMS project sets us up well, I agree with everything that Lisa said. That we really don't know how it's going to evolve, but with the fiber at the traffic signals, it does look like one of the things that is the communication of the machine to machine. So as two vehicles are approaching an intersection together, their ability to communicate to each other, but we don't know what that protocol is going to look like. If the major manufacturers of vehicles are going to agree on a standard that they can all leverage. But it does look like having switching at the edge, closest to the intersection, having that ability to have the communication be very rapid, like in sub-millisecond, like very fast, so that the machines to machine can communicate. So we don't know what that's going to look like, but I think at least we're encouraged that we have that infrastructure, so that if it starts evolving, like I said, Lisa said, rapidly, we might be in a position to encourage manufacturers and people to come down to our community and make investments.
Barbara, Carrie, any last messaging that you want to leave with the commissioners about workforce, jobs, training? Any last pieces you think they should have on their radar that we haven't talked about?
Maybe we were going to say the same thing. Yeah. Maybe you can talk about the workforce or mobility work.
Sure. Yeah, we are currently in process of trying to set up a workforce mobility program here in Scott County in partnership with the Dakota County Technical College. And Carver County is also going to be a part of it. The workforce mobility program is something that was run in Dakota County recently. In Dakota County, they used ARPA funds to provide free training in high demand industries for their residents who kind of met a certain income threshold. And we're looking to do something on a similar but smaller scale here. And we are just right now kind of sorting out the schedule and when those class offerings will be, but it will likely be starting in September. We'll be offering classes for certified nursing assistant and trained medication aid. It will be a paired class, which actually DCTC said they've never done before, pairing it, and they really love the idea because it'll make folks even more employable after they exit that. We'll also be offering a pharmacy tech program and a boiler operators licensing program. So we're really excited about that. As soon as we get the schedule nailed down, we'll have kind of a pretty robust marketing effort that will be led by Dakota County Technical College out to all of our residents. So,
great, thank you. Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions or comments? Commissioner Brennan. Oh, turn it, thank you.
I have a couple questions. One is our entertainment district in Scott County is very large, and how does that impact economic development in the area? Mr. Kursky.
One in particular?
I think it's a draw. I mean, particularly with people being home now. I think the change at Canterbury has created more. It's not just a racetrack anymore. It's more of a much larger community. I think Valley Fair's adapted pretty well. I think their change in their Halloween program, we had a lot of issues when they ran the last program they had, so they switched it to more of a family-oriented program, and they actually did about the same amount of revenue with a lot less problems. So I think it's an asset. I think we have to manage it well. I think transportation, particularly with the amphitheater, is going to be important. With 19,000 seats and moving people in and out. And I think a lot of those people will not be coming from Scott County, but they'll be coming from outside of Minnesota. So I think it's making sure that their experience is good.
I have one more question. A lot of our people with disabilities are struggling to find jobs. What work is being done to connect them to the job market and provide that opportunity for them?
Yeah, I think that's such an area where we have opportunity to continue to do more. I think as we look to solve our labor shortage problem, I think we need to look at how to engage all groups that maybe aren't as engaged with the workforce to the level that the general population is. And so I think, we continue to have conversations and a strong partnership with New Options, but I know that they haven't been able to probably be as robust in that area as that they had wanted to or hoped, just due to some of the staffing challenges that they themselves have experienced. And I think many of our disability providers have experienced due to the labor shortage. So I think it's an area we need to continue to part with our local agencies on and continue to provide work and support for solutions for those folks.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Brennan, I will say when we reviewed some of the innovative budget requests, it hit two things. It's innovative for the county, but maybe based on a neighbor, so it has some experience to build off of, was about disability jobs. And that was really encouraging to see that come in from our staff and some of the supervisors there. So I think maybe there's something in that innovation grant that might help there.
Yeah, we have staff are concerned about it and have been focusing on what is the right issue and the right solution. So there are ideas percolating.
And if I could just add, the vocational rehabilitation services that are run by the state, it was last week or the week before, had asked to come and do a tour of our Career Force Center and our career lab here, met with our employment and training staff and discussed ways that we can better work together. We provide a lot of the same services and similar services. So how can we complement one another? What are they offering that we don't? What are we offering that they don't? And how can we create some combined programming? So there will be more to come on that. That was exciting. Mm-hmm.
My next, thank you. First of all, I just want to say thank you to the panel. I really like the focus of this Scott Delivers, because from a county perspective, at least my perspective from the board, is economic development from a county role is about the infrastructure, is about making this an attractive place to do business. It's not so much about attracting certain businesses. That we leave to our city partners, that we leave to the CDA. So I appreciate the focus. One thing I think we talked about how proud we are about our labor force participation rate. It's always been very high, continues to be high. And I just want to remind people, that's all the people 16 and over who are working or who could be working. That number includes all of our senior citizens who are retired and don't want to work anymore. So that's a huge rate. But that's my caution, is that we've enjoyed a little bit of why we enjoyed that rate, besides being such hardworking folk, is that we have a very young county. And our county is aging a bit, and I think we may see that change a bit as more folks age, and we shouldn't, pull the fire alarm or anything when we see that, because demographically we might just see that a little bit. And it's just really good, I think, to be able to communicate to the public, because I think especially after the pandemic, a lot of thought about all these people not working. We need to get them back to work. Well, here in Scott County, people are working. They are back to work, and we just need to make sure we can communicate that well. Early on when we talked about transportation, I think, Lisa, you talked about a lot of the great things we've done to help businesses be able to even expand further into our county. But I do want to make sure that we talk about our transportation infrastructure that helps even the more urbanized part of the county do better on 13, things like that. We're not, this is a message to any of our city neighbors watching. We're not all about, moving business and people further and further away and keeping them on the roads longer. We do, all the work done around 13 is helping move people better and move freight and commerce safer in our more urbanized areas too. So I think that's important that we hold that up and celebrate all the work that folks have done on that. I think that's all. Oh, I just want to echo my colleagues' comments on really looking at folks who have disabilities and getting them into the labor force. And I think our service providers are in a tough spot with staffing, but I think we have a lot to learn from some of our local businesses who have been doing this work without government involvement. And I really push us to look to them and partner with them versus just looking at those service providers. So hopefully in that innovation, we can make sure we do that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Becker. Commissioner Beer.
This is going to go in the theme of what a time to be alive. What a time to be alive. I mean, we are in a state of transition. We might not know the protocols, as Perry was talking about, we don't know the protocols for different types of vehicles, but whether it's connected or autonomous vehicles, I'm trying to think, was it in the 80s back in the day when we were going to be in flying cars by now? Was it in the paperless office? But we're getting closer. It does feel like we are definitely closer to that being a reality. I'm going to look at Lisa and it's happening, right? It's going to happen. We don't know exactly when. So transit is changing. Transportation is changing. Yeah, these connected and autonomous vehicles. What is it, ATMS, the system along 42? I used to say that was the longest, shortest road in the country. And now it's actually like, wow, I can actually make the 35E green north arrow 7 times out of 10. So things are changing. It's pretty impressive. And I know we are looking at that. We don't know the protocols, but we're trying to set the table as a county to have that infrastructure in place. I think we did a lot of that in 2020, 2021 for internet and broadband. One of my biggest questions remains this, and it is not necessarily in the county purview, but the collective us, that we all have these different placards around the table and represent different parts, but it's the collective us. The transition from what seems to be, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but a heavy distribution type service-oriented industry to something that, boy, are we in a spot to where we could leverage the dirt that we actually have pointing to one of the last slides to be a transitional type of county where we can bring in new industry that we haven't maybe thought of? We've been doing LLE, live, learn, earn I heard some, I don't know if it was groanings or mumblings or whatever it was, but 15 years we've been doing that, right? So sometimes when you're got the blinders on and you're doing this thing, you can't see the transition and make those changes and adjustments. So I'm just wondering out loud collectively as a county, are we in a spot that we are actively pursuing the next best thing or the next new thing or the first old thing that was pretty sexy back in the day, like manufacturing. I know that kind of lost its luster, but boy, that's exciting in the last couple of years. To bring back those types of industries to this county with what we've already done, or is there collective thinking again? Well, this is what we've been doing, so this is what we keep doing. We got this program that's been, oh, wait a minute, what did we miss? Because we were doing this thing. Like, are we, again, the collective, we have our head on the swivel, like, oh, boy, there's some really neat opportunities that we could take advantage of if our blinders were off. I'm not saying they're on, but just creatures of habit. That was a lot.
Any responses?
I think we're doing it. I mean, I think that if you look, at least in Shakopee, the most recent projects we've done, Cherney, which came from Medina, which is a pretty sophisticated advanced manufacturing company, KEB America, their corporate headquarters, and they doubled the size of their facility. And we've made really clear in all that land we've annexed in the West End, it's not going to be for distribution, it's going to be for manufacturing.
I think I would add to that too, with the Scott County Center for Entrepreneurship, we are looking for new innovative ideas. And we've had a number of businesses go through that program as well as the Fast Track Challenge. We've seen good success with 33 new jobs in the past year at an average wage of $80,000. So again, not creating more of the same, but trying to look at innovative approaches and businesses.
Okay, thank you. Leslie.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to ask Brad a couple thoughts on 20, because that has been a topic of discussion around here lately, right? Annexation and what for is annexation. So a place like Savage shows a deficit of 27. I'm assuming some of that, I don't know what your thoughts are, would come for redevelopment, or does that mean some of that might even shift if you start to look at it to a place like Prior Lake, where we're having that discussion right now? I know that's one of the things that's been brought up. I mean, clearly Shakopee is high demand because of the location where it sits on 169. But it also shows Jordan with the surplus and Belle Plaine, and they've talked about being willing to carry. Does the county refer, so I'm asking about 5 questions here of you now. Does the county refer some of these like industrial to a place like Jordan and Belle Plaine because they're willing to deal with that? It puts them on 169. And in a place like Jordan where we're sitting at a surplus, I still have to believe that cost of running that pipe up like to the RTF is extremely expensive for 10 lots, 8 lots, whatever that is. What does that chart tell you or say to you as we're working through some of these discussions?
Yeah, I think in the city of Savage, I think their deficit really can be made up with some redevelopment. When we did the bus tour with Greater MSP, we took a look at some of those businesses along 101 near the city of Shakopee line and really underutilized properties. And I think the city of Savage is really trying to focus redevelopment of those properties and probably get them platted and get utilities out to each of those new lots. So that's kind of the story I see in Savage, is the redevelopment. Down in Jordan, there is a surplus now. I think a lot of their projected growth is to the south and west, where they've invested a lot of infrastructure out to the 59-169 intersection area. And a lot of that acreage is slated for commercial and industrial growth. I'll refer to Joe how you get some of the leads that come in from Greater MSP or others, and how you've directed them to some of those communities that have that surplus.
And Brad, one of my specific questions is, I'm assuming we get some of these light industrial lawn, you keep saying we get calls.
Yes.
Do we refer them to Jordan or to?
Yep, understood, yep. We get calls from a lot of home extended businesses that have kind of outgrown their house. They start asking us about properties that are available to relocate and expand their business. They start looking at some properties in the townships. We will mention, if you're looking for properties, you've got options in the cities at some of those city industrial parks, particularly city of Jordan and New Prague, Belle Plaine. So yeah, we do that initial. Have you looked at those properties? For whatever reason, they don't pursue those city industrial lots and continue to have discussions with the county about opening up some rural properties. Yeah. But how about on your perspective?
Certainly. The Scott County CDA has a membership to the Minnesota Commercial Real Estate Association, so we receive broker leads with specific requests. So they will ask for 5 acres or 10 acres or a specific building size, and many times they call out the community in which they're looking or the communities or a certain mile radius from the Twin Cities. Oftentimes, if there are not sites available in the community such as Shakopee, Savage Prior Lake, and we know that there are lots or acreage in the other communities, we will respond with those availability. And oftentimes they're surprised how close those communities really are to the Twin Cities. It's more of that perception that they're more rural. So we are trying to guide them to the available lots in Scott County.
So we're not the end of the earth here sometimes, right? You can see it, yeah. Good. Commissioner Ulrich's been waiting for a few minutes here.
Well, just a couple comments, and I'm going to speculate a little bit where we're at, where we might be going. I see transit as being much smaller, much more individualized, autonomous vehicles, picking up people at their homes, bringing them to destinations. I see that that's going to grow, and the vehicles are going to become much, much, much smaller. We're aging society. I think that's going to increase the volunteer pool. I think Hopscotch might be a model that could take off. But most of all, I think we need to, either for scale or the county, engage a futurist. Have somebody come, and we had a futurist come to scale a couple of years ago. I think we could use that again. But I think we're in the cusp of a dramatic change in how people get around and how they get to jobs. And so I'm anxious to see what develops there.
I didn't hear the whole thing.
Hear me on that?
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, more comments. So, all right, thank you. Anybody else here? Nobody? Okay. Let me see. Thank you all very much. I think we got a lot of good growth opportunities here in Scott County, that's for sure. So anyhow, with that, we are going to move